Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, we have a little bit of news. It's not as news intensive as the past couple weeks have been, but no less, we are, as of the day we're recording, which is October 13th, 2020, 3 weeks out from Election Day. Now, by the time this premieres, it'll be 20 days out, as in 1 day less than 3 weeks. So, as of today's 21 days. Tomorrow will be 20 days, and we decided to do something a little special for this little final stretch of the election. Now, of course, this will vary highly as new information comes out, such as October surprise, whatever. But GSP and I decided to both make our own maps based on current polling and just gut instinct on how we think election night will play out. Now, I didn't want to do the this leans blue, this leans red. I wanted pure solid prediction: who wins what and how much they win it by. So, without further ado, I'm going to show our election maps right here, and mine is in the top left. GSP's is right here in the bottom right. Now, what I have is I have
Ever the
Trump. What was that?
ever the pessimist. Me.
Yeah, I mean you're Slavic, okay? That's why else do I bring you on the show? But what I have right here is on my map. I have 279 for Trump, 259 for Biden. Now, that's much less than Trump's 306 victory in 2016. And where he loses it is in number one, Arizona, which we both agree on. Arizona, I believe, is trending blue because of demographics and because of course, that whether that be an increased Hispanic population or liberal diaspora fleeing from states like California. But not even that. The reason I say this, and I know Trump's up with Hispanics and everything, so that is playing well, and that's honestly why I gave him Florida. But what I think we're looking at in Arizona is in 2018, McCain dies, and he is replaced by a Republican holdover, which is set by the governor. 2018 congressional elections come around. The Democrat, who albeit is a very centrist, very moderate Democrat, wins the Senate in Arizona. And historically, when there is an appointed senator, they lose their election. This has been the case for a few other ones, unless it's like a state like, again, like California or New York, like a solid red or solid blue state, they usually lose their election. Even sometimes they lose it in a primary. So I'm thinking this current Republican senator, whose name I can't remember, is probably going to lose the Democratic candidate just because of current trends, which I believe Arizona is going to go blue for the Senate, which means I believe it's inclined to go blue when it comes to the presidential election, even though there has been cases where the Senate vote and the presidential vote do differentiate. The other state I took away from Trump was Michigan. Now, I do Michigan because of minority turnout, and I think despite Kamala being a cop, Kamala's prosecutorial record, it will still draw out minorities. And again, with Biden as the running mate, being Biden as the main candidate, being Obama's running mate in 2008 and 2012, he has that association with Obama attached to him. Like, oh, he was the first black president's vice president. We should vote for him. So that's why I take Michigan away from Trump. Now, another place where GSP and I disagree is Pennsylvania. And I'll make this case before I hand it over to him to explain his map. Pennsylvania, again, Trump did pick up on a lot of the rural counties that did tend to go more blue. And it also did have to do, same case in Michigan in 2016, with depressed urban turnout, depressed minority turnout. So that's what flipped Pennsylvania into the Trump column. Now, not that Trump has really done anything substantive. Now, there has been things, for example, up until COVID, his economy actually was pretty good. I'll give him that. Now, is that enough to run a country on? Is that enough to run an election on? In my opinion, no. There were a few things. Trump also does still speak to the base in terms of like a cultural battle where he's the big strong guy standing up against the lunatics on the far left wing, which again, to a degree is true, and that's something he can definitely campaign on. But the reason I keep Pennsylvania red is because of the energy industry. And this was brought to my attention in the debate last week, the vice presidential debate last week, where the Biden Harris position, it does flip flop, where we're going to ban fracking, we're not going to ban fracking, we're going to crack down on energy production, we're going to increase energy production, to the point where there's no coherent platform. Whereas with Trump, it is a guarantee that fracking will continue, that the energy industry will probably be less regulated under a Republican administration. So that's honestly why I give it to Pennsylvania, because again, Pennsylvania, very large energy industry there. But I suppose I'll hand it over to you to make your case.
Well, you know, my, first let me establish a few things. One is I know there's a strong historical precedent for Trump's reelection, and I am really not being a contrarian for being a contrarian's sake. It really is my Slavic background. It really is the pessimism. But like in all seriousness, so I understand that there is a historical precedent. Given COVID, which I think is a factor, the fact remains that whoever base is more energized, who's you know having the larger rallies, and let's face it, Biden's rallies are dwarfed. Some of Biden's rallies are even non-existent, but um, that's an enormous factor. Number two, uh, several presidents actually have won when there has been an economic downturn and when there's been like civil unrest. And when you factor in, let's say, like some kind of a disease, some kind of a health issue that concerns the nation, yes, I mean, even in those cases. So there is a strong case, I understand, for enthusiasm. And I understand how COVID would probably play a part in skewing this idea about enthusiasm, because, of course, in a lot of the Democrats, almost like as a religious obligation, unless, of course, it's BLM, uh, are not going to attend his rallies. Now, you could argue that that's convenient because he doesn't really foster strong enthusiasm, because he's still somebody against Trump. He's not. He doesn't really have anything else except I'm going to liberate you from Trump.
I mean, what's his
But
campaign slogans about unity in the soul of the nation? Nothing substantive. Just, I mean, his campaign slogans might as well be is "I am the Democratic candidate, and if you don't like Trump, vote for me." Because, as you said, that's really the platform they're putting forward. And even with Kamala Harris, not to hijack your point too much, you have two very disparate people. Now, that's not to say Trump and Pence agree on everything, but again, there was a synthesis to the point where you could see whereas one is the running mate and one is the presidential candidate, but to the point where there's no synthesis when it comes to Biden Harris. Maybe it's because of Biden's lack of platform, but when I listen to them, I don't hear the same ticket talking.
yeah, so yeah, that's a good point. So I have a feeling that maybe Trump isn't going to win Wisconsin, uh, and only because Pennsylvania has been a solid Democrat state for so long. The exception being Trump after over 2 decades, and you have even like some counties that voted twice for Obama, like around the Lake Erie area. And I understand people voted for Trump, but I'd also like to say that he does have a very vocal base. It is there and it is large. I would also say, however, that a lot of his base is really not that excited. I think they've looked at the last 4 years. Very many of the things that they wanted have not come through, and I think they never will. So, in a way, when Trump is saying that we're going to make America great, in a way, he's kind of telling you the same thing Biden is like, elect me because the other guy is going to be so much worse. You're not going to get what you want, but what's coming is going to be far worse. Um, I'm not saying that a lot of Trump supporters or former Trump supporters don't think that or don't even entertain that idea. I think they do. But I just question how much enthusiasm there really is, because you watch the first debate and it's it really is kind of cringy. Trump is attacking Biden. There's several things that are not like 2016.
Yeah, for whatever
Besides the
reason,
fact that Trump is
there was a much more fun, energetic feeling whenever you tech Hillary like that. But with Biden, it's just not there, at least in my opinion.
right. First of all, Biden is much more likable. Second of all, unlike 2016, Trump already has a record now, 4 years long, and there is no border wall. Uh, we're still, not out of certain Middle Eastern countries. Of course, this account knows that that's also a possibility, anyways. But a lot of the promises were believed, and I think if he had done something, you know, uh, for immigration, that is like basically cut immigration or put a moratorium on it or just stop it
Yeah, I mean,
for a few
granted,
years.
it is down, but it's half measures compared to what we were sold, which isn't a surprise for politics. But I don't know, especially like with the enthusiasm behind Trump, seeing as he was an unknown quantity, unproven. Maybe that's why it's so bitter. Whereas if an establishment Republican or a slightly anti-establishment Republican, say Ted Cruz was the Republican candidate in 2016 and wins the election on similar immigration policies, it wouldn't have been as surprising if he let the voters down on that because, again, despite being, quote unquote anti-establishment, he still is a politician with a record behind him. Whereas with Trump, I think a lot of people got swept up. A lot of first-time voters registered to vote for Trump, which is another thing. A lot of apathetic people thought they could really get behind that. And again, how enthusiastic they are for him right now, I don't know. Now, I think the big question, which is where you and I disagree, it's like, are they still enthusiastic enough to help him eke it out?
It's a tough one. A lot of the votes are already in. I think we're going to know a lot more about who's leading by November 3rd than we did in 2016. There's some states that have already passed the amount of registered votes now than this time 4 years ago. So yeah, we're gonna know sooner. And then this, I don't want to get conspiratorial, but in a way, you can tell that the elites cannot. It's the messaging is almost like we cannot afford him to be in office, and it's more than just the moral outcries of rad libs and bourgeois liberals, on the coastal cities. Um, you're having like the Pentagon is worried, frankly. And I just wondered like what they would do like if it looked like he would be winning. So I think so. I guess my bottom line is this is a very orthodox situation. It's very unique, and there's a lot of things in play. So my take is that there's a better chance he will lose, despite the historical for him to win.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And like I said, I think it comes down to the big states in play, which I think I'm not saying anything new or trailblazing by saying this is Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think Ohio, at least in this election, is not a swing state. I think Virginia, again, and Virginia and Florida also aren't swing states. Again, Florida was teetering on the edge there for a while, but it seems to have stabilized for Trump. And also, I know this isn't really like solid information to base an opinion off of, but internal polls that the candidates have are much more accurate than the polls we have access to. And Biden has been really campaigning hard in Florida. The Biden campaign has been going really hard in Florida, which makes me think they probably aren't doing too well there in their internal polls, which makes me feel inclined to put it in the red column. But at then, like I said, I think the four it's going to come down to is Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I think Pennsylvania will be the deciding state this election. And I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
the deciding state last election too. I think we're getting to the point where Pennsylvania, it may seem like a state that's dried up, used out compared to states out west or states down south. But no, I think for the next few election cycles, this one, 2024, probably into the early 2030s, Pennsylvania is going to be the pivotal one. And again, that also depends on the directions the parties takes because we are in unstable times. We could see the parties take radically different directions, or I don't think it's going to happen at this point, but you never know. A new party spring up out of nowhere. But at this point, yeah, again, I think the big question comes down to is can Trump garner enough enthusiasm to eke out another victory? And that'll be the question for the next 3 weeks. Although,
Yeah, maybe something else to keep in mind is maybe discuss a few hypotheticals based on events which have already taken place as a way to project the future. Like, let's suppose Biden wins, right? There's a very good likelihood that a vaccine shows up really quickly. And, before spring of 2021, like definitely no lockdowns whatsoever. Media has no interest in it whatsoever, right? Like it could happen before the end of January, maybe halfway through February if he wins. Like this, right? And then there's a strong possibility if Trump is elected, then a lot of things are going to get stymied. There's going to be a lot of political pressure to keep the lockdowns and the protests going. So that's one hypothetical. That's a hypothetical situation that's I think is strongly in play. And that's based on comments, everything from that New York Times article about, the Podesta group that, war gamed this particular scenario. We know about that. But also some of the statements Hillary Clinton made about, like, for Biden to never secede defeat. And then I think also the kind of long-term kind of trauma, but two major things that 2020 will be remembered for, and that's COVID, because it does seem like maybe Trump has lost. I don't want to be one of those people who are, absolutely sure of themselves and make claims like he's losing his older base and he relies on that. Like I understand there is truth in that, and we saw, was it Virginia or West Virginia that voted that flipped blue, right, and discovered that a lot of this was actually because older whites had kind of gotten tired of him.
yeah,
Um,
that was Virginia, and Virginia's an interesting case on how rapidly a state can change politically and electorally because it was a Republican bastion for years. Obama wins it, I think, in 2012, and it's been Democratic onward in both gubernatorial, Senate, presidential elections. Hillary won it, for example. Her running mate was also from Virginia. That has to do, again, with a lot of older people going the way of the dinosaur, to put it politely, growing disdain for the Republican Party because they don't like Trump's uncouthness or believe a lot of what's said about him, or various other reasons. And also, Virginia has been a hotspot for refugees and migrants. And on top of that, a lot of DC bureaucrats, a lot of people who work in DC, have been living in Virginia because it's much cheaper. A lot of them used to, I mean, a lot of them still do, but a lot of them used to be in Maryland, which was the other big destination for them. But it seems like Northern Virginia has also become the really hot spot for a lot of the DC elites to actually have their residences in, which means they're, and of course, most of them vote blue. So that explains Virginia's flip. But yeah,
Yeah, so I'm just considering, a lot of the public is kind of getting the messaging that if you elect him, this insanity is going to go on. Like, in a way, they understand like who's actually in charge, right? People are saying, like, Trump is constantly tweeting law and order, but it's obvious he can't really enforce law and order. And the only reason things in some cities have not died down, right? And Portland and Seattle are two strong examples, but the height of the protests has passed. And But there is, I think, the messaging, the narrative uh, is implicit, and people have absorbed it, that if you reelect them, this is what it's going to be like for 4 more years. And there's a lot of people who've been scared into. I mean, it's just absolute pure strong arm tactics on the part of the Democrat, and on the part of the the actual machinery in power. And so I think that there's a lot of normies that are Democrat or Republican that are thinking, okay, we'll elect Biden because then the protests will stop, and the protests will stop for a little while. However, I would say that there's a very strong and developing wing of the Democrat Party that, if things like UBI and minimum wage and other kind of more classically left wing, old left concerns are not met, uh, that we can see the reemergence of these protests. But I think the support for them will be far less. They really will turn into young people's protests more than they already are. And because I don't think America is actually ever going to have UBI. Maybe something can be with minimum wage, but they're in for the disappointment as well. But we're talking about people who own property, and about people who have a house and maybe have a summer home somewhere. People with more disposable income, or at least have more assets. And a lot of these people are kind of thinking, you know, Trump in office really might lead to maybe not a civil war, but a kind of perpetual violence that is really unprecedented in America for over 100 years.
Yeah, definitely. And
So yeah, I mean, I would just say that, so that the pessimist side on this cast. That's my position.
just to actually
I just wonder how many people have been scared into that position or not.
further your point, and one of my big problems with democracy and universal suffrage is I wouldn't say your average person is necessarily dumb, but your average person definitely does not understand politics or governmental structures, governmental systems, despite how much education we give them on civics, whatever. Most people, when it comes to political issues and other, I guess you could say, quote unquote, highbrow and intellectual issues, are easily swayed. Their opinion can go from one place to the other very quickly. And what it boils down to is who controls the media, and who's in power right now. Now, of course, the media is heavily skewed towards the Democrats, so that's mostly what you get, and they get to push those narratives. I mean, even Fox News, the Republican bastion, isn't really that right wing, but whatever. And the other point is, most people look at it and they think the president has a lot more power than he actually does, and they associate a lot of things going wrong with the president that in some cases don't even necessarily deserve to blame. Like again, COVID. There's plenty of things you can say about Trump's botch response, but a lot of it also falls on the local and state governments to the point where a lot of the deaths in New York are because of Cuomo and De Blasio's policies, for example. But people look at the number and say, 250,000 people have died from COVID, and they think, well, what's the Trump administration doing about it? Can we really trust him in office, despite the fact that it may not have to do with the federal government response or whatever? Or people look, oh, I mean, there's been riots for how long? Why isn't Trump or the federal government doing something about this? And they tack the blame on him, whether justly or unjustly. And again, that's just how most people's minds work on politics. And if anything, that's more of a case against universal suffrage and everyone having the right to vote than it is against any of these particular talking points. But,
Mm.
and again, I think the biggest advantage, of course, the Democrats have is that they're more media savvy. They have more people in the media to push their ideas. And the only Republican bastion, aside from, again, Tucker Carlson, isn't really anything that impressive when it comes to media power. And I don't know, you see this all over the world, even like in conflicts. Again, the Syrian rebels had much better PR, especially towards the beginning, which is what scored them a lot of victories. But at the end of the day, again, most people can be easily swayed to any political position, and that's what these kind of elections come down to.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Um, yeah, I do think they've created an atmosphere basically where people really do want to return to a normalcy, and in a way, uh, the kind of hype that the media made about Trump could never actually be established, right? Except that, it was just basically liberals upset he won. However, the difference this time is they blame Corona on him as if like he's responsible for Corona, as if he can make the governors and the mayors and the senators all do his bidding, which he cannot. I understand how he might, in their eyes, have shown stronger leadership, but that isn't to say that a Democrat in office would not have had to deal with states that refuted him and did not go along and went with their own measures, which would, let's say, be radically different than those of California or New York. Um, you have liberal states that have implemented lockdowns at an earlier time with greater or lesser severity, it's and so on and so on. So yeah, it's really really dirty. But like, I mean, even the generals basically saying that you can remain unified even without a president. It's just disgusting.
Speaking of generals, I usually cover this news at the end of the show, but I think it relates enough to the election to bring it up now. Did you hear the alleged new proposal for Afghanistan?
The new proposal for Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I mean, I've been reading about the Taliban endorsing Trump.
yeah. I mean, but if you
Big.
believe what Trump has to say, allegedly all troops will be out of the country by Christmas. Now,
Yes, 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 everyone.
I am of two minds about this. I honestly don't know what to think because number one, what we all know is even if we do a full official withdrawal, the country's still going to be crawling with thousands of contractors, CIA agents, the like. We'll still be heavily involved in Afghanistan, even if our official presence ends. Now, again, I think a lot of this is a campaign stunt. I do think Trump is generally on the less interventionist side, despite some things that may have happened during his time in office. I do think, honestly, he still is a bit more reserved when it comes to getting involved in foreign conflicts, to his credit at least. I'll give him that. But
Mm.
this has been tried a lot of times. We've been in negotiation with the Taliban since 2018. Well, American delegates and Taliban delegates have met several times at several different places. And I do think this time there is slightly more hope because it doesn't seem like there's much pushback from the Pentagon, from the administration, from the cabinet, or even Congress, because Congress has also been a big stumbling block in this. For example, when Trump wanted to do some limited withdrawals from the Korean Peninsula, Congress pretty much blocked him with that. And I don't know how
Mhm.
they did that, what legal arguments they made, because that was technically within the president's authority. But again, we all know that the Constitution is kind of a weak guideline that again only gets enforced when it's used to stifle anything productive nowadays. That's pretty much I'd hate to break it to you, and this is somebody who comes from one of those backgrounds, but ultimately the Constitution at this point, especially, is just a document from a couple hundred years ago. I'd hate to say it, but it's the way it is. But you don't see much pushback from Congress. You don't see much pushback from the Pentagon, from the anywhere else in the administration. So I'm thinking we may actually get a substantial withdrawal to the point where we're officially out of Afghanistan. Again, we'll still be security contractors. There may be a non-combat sort of basing like we did in Iraq, where we have troops there, but they're not in a combat role, similar to, for example, Japan, Italy, or Germany, where we have you know peacetime troops stationed. Now, again, like I said, I'm actually more optimistic than in previous times because I think the Taliban. I believe it or not, I think the Taliban's optimism about this actually says it's a lot more substantive than what we would have originally thought. And the other case I'll make, not necessarily the case that we're not getting up, because again, there can always be a false flag. Oh, I can't believe the Taliban did this very convenient attack at this specific moment, right before we were about to withdraw. We've seen this before, cough Syria.
Mhm.
But if America does get out of Afghanistan, if the troops are out of the country by Christmas Day, that is very foreboding, I think. For the American empire, that is. And now, again, I'm fully in
Right.
favor of getting out of there, but to the point where we let go of something we have wrestled to keep control of and keep a presence in for almost 20 years now, I think it's very foreboding when we all of a sudden just drop it. Now, again, troop deployments are lower than they've been in, since the beginning of the war, but to the point where we completely drop it, I think there's something more going on that they're not telling us.
Yeah, it's a very big deal. Honestly, leaving Afghanistan is maybe like there's only two reasons why they're leaving. Because one, they've secured it; they can rely on contractors now. Other big players in that region have made a secret backdoor agreement. Uh, no other smaller nation right now threatens more instability. Although, how can you even imagine even more instability in Afghanistan? Honestly, it has its good years and bad years, but it's generally never been stable. It hasn't been stable for what, at least 30 years. Um, I mean, even longer, but at least 40. So uh, it's a big one. It's a big one. It definitely deserves looking into where America would have to reposition itself in Central Asia, because if it doesn't reposition itself in Central Asia, then this is huge, and it does mean that the empire's priorities have changed,
I wonder if
and
that
that
anything to do with the recent little quote unquote uprisings in Kyrgyzstan. New base, possibly. I wouldn't go that far, but again, yeah, you have this news coming out around the same time as that news, with pretty much how many fires are going on in the former Soviet Union right now, Belarus, the Caucasus, and again, like I said, spreading to Central Asia. So, for all we know, Kyrgyzstan could be having its color revolution. That's the new, more stable position for U.S. troops. Now, again, I think it's way too early to say anything like that, but these are the kind of things you have to be
yeah.
thinking about.
Right, right. I don't see anything right now in Kyrgyzstan that would offer America a base. That doesn't mean they're not looking at it, and they don't have like a long range plan where in 2022 they will have a base. There's just nothing on the ground right now at the moment. But and when I say on the ground, I don't mean a base. I mean like the potentiality isn't there. Um, And we also have to remember that this is, Trump likes to make these promises, seems to like to make them, especially when there's an election going on. I remember he made this during the primaries. There were primaries going on in 2018, and he was going to pull them out. And, that's still relevant. People do like to hear that. And Republicans more so than Democrats, because of course Democrats have really do have Trump derangement syndrome. They will literally, support McCain and George Bush, who are really in effect war criminals, like because their hate for Trump is so extreme. It's on such a, I don't know, symbolic and semi-conscious level. It's really extraordinary. I have nothing in my life that I can remember that's remotely like this. So who knows? They're not going to be able to play. Russians have been putting bounties on American soldiers again, obviously. But for them, if Trump concedes some kind of geopolitical position, and it looks like that conceding might go to Russia, then for them it simply reinforces the Russia hoax narrative that Russia stole the election and Trump is an unwitting puppet of Putin.
I have a very long shot theory, but I think it's still worth saying. I wonder if things look so bad in the Trump campaign's internal polls that they think they're going to lose, that getting a withdrawal process going in Afghanistan is a giant middle finger to the Biden administration. So, because obviously the Biden administration will want to continue the policy of at least some limited presence in Afghanistan and deeper involvement in Central Asia to the point where it just puts a mess on his plate that he has to clean up.
Yeah, that's possibilities. I see what you're saying. Maybe he's not faking it this time. Maybe it's for real. He like it like I say, he has mentioned it. Uh, you know, the generals have been emphatically against it. Uh, oftentimes saying that I'm not going to speak to Pompeo. I'm going to speak directly to the president about this. Really crazy, unprecedented stuff, or stuff that happens very infrequently, right? Lets you know maybe there's something wrong with the chain of command, right? That they feel that they can afford to be able to speak to Trump directly in order to dissuade him. Um, and I think there's an overall feeling in the West and in America in particular that the civil unrest, that the retraction from certain geopolitical enclaves, Iraq is another very good example of this. Four bases shut down, troops moved out. Germany's another one, but it only looks like that. We've discussed it. It's because Germany's just not relevant in the new Cold War against Russia. But Belarus isn't going like they had hoped. The arming of Ukraine in order to have Ukraine fight Russia has not happened. All of this is taking place on Ukrainian territory, not Russian territory. So the Russians played that one well. Uh, so there's a kind of a growing litany of defeats, and the rising star in the east is China. I just read their manufacturing now is taking over even more. Their economy is ballooning. I know they have their problems, and it depends on who you talk to and the way the American debt is tied into the China economy as well. But when you look at billionaires and you look at where the greatest amount of billionaires came out in 2019 and 2020, like, I mean, America's at like, I think 270 and China is at 1,148. Uh, like, there's more that have popped up than the next three countries combined. So, that is a trend. And yes, you can argue that America's had billionaires, millionaires for a longer period of time than China, but that doesn't negate the trend. Um, so anyhow, there is a certain malaise, there is a certain lack of direction, and there is a certain sense of division in the U.S. So yeah, maybe pulling the troops out is a kind of a bit of a silver lining prior to the election. He also has to build up hope. He has to build up like that he can actually accomplish things because when you look at these MAGA rallies or the like with these ridiculous videos of people in these like frankly like disturbing patriotic glitter costumes that have homoeroticism written all over them.
Yeah, what
Like,
you don't want
what
to go
is
to the
this?
MAGA drag show? That there goes my plans for this weekend. Thanks a
Like,
lot.
what is this movement? It's an absolutely hollow movement. It's like literally like the gay version of owning the libs. Like, what is this?
Yeah,
So
I didn't know
it's
Milo
very
became a
hollow.
Republican Party strategist.
This is how we win.
But you brought it up. Speaking of rising stars in the East, you know who was new to Twitter?
Vile.
Uh,
Well, I guess.
yes, but more importantly, one Svetlana Tiskunaya
Tikhanovskaya.
There we go. And her,
Yes,
her her fir-
yes, yes.
her first new tweet, all in English, with the picture of her looking
I
like
have an
a.
uncle that looks
You have an uncle that looks like her.
unironically. Go ahead.
Well, don't worry. I'm sure your uncle's more pleasant to look at than this. But just to read this thread she put out: 2 months of political
Oh
crisis,
yeah.
violence, and lawlessness in Belarus. Enough is enough. There's that phrase. We're announcing the people's ultimatum on October 25th. We demand that number one, Lukashenko must go. Number two, violence has to stop. Three, political prisoners must be released. Regular weekends in Belarus ended 2 months ago. We all voted for change on the 9th of August and have been peacefully protest. Oh, there's the phrase again. Ever since they stole our votes. In response, the authorities shot us, beat us, and lied to us. Okay, based. As a Belarusian quote-unquote policeman is beating up a demonstrator, you can hear him bellow, "How do you like these changes? Take that!" This means intimidating us, beating not only men, but women and children and elderly people. This is a state terror. Everyone involved is an accomplice. Belarusian authorities and Lukashenko, oh, there we go, personally have 13 days to fulfill these conditions. Meanwhile, while we proceed to peaceful protests, unless they deliver, Belarusians will start a national strike on October 26th. I Lukashenko must be shaking his boots right now. He must be on the phone with Putin saying, This woman is terrifying. We have to take care of this situation right now. Help me, Putin. Send in the troops. Union state, all of it." I mean, he must be shaking in his boots. But after the complete, and she even admits this in her thread, burnout in Belarus, where they haven't had the weekly protests in 2 months. I don't know. This seems like I don't know. Is woke social media campaign really the last ditch effort to try to get a color revolution in Belarus? I suppose this is really the direction they're taking this in. And you know what? I'm not surprised. Let me just pose this to you. Who is more of a clown, her or Guaido?
Yeah. Uh, she's going to become irrelevant. I am not afraid of the West snatching Belarus. It's over. Um, they really can't generate the kind of imagery right now. Um, and it's kind of off the radar, and it is coinciding with the American election.
Thanks a lot, Trump.
So yeah, thanks again, Putin puppet. So but there's other reasons. There's other reasons. First of all, her demands are ridiculous. Nobody takes those demands seriously. Second of all, she has charges like her in Russia. If she's ever caught, if he's ever steps foot in Russia, she's going to be charged, and she'll very probably go to jail. These have to do with some kind of a business, tax cheating. Number three, one of the triumvirate of like badass Belarusian women who tried to cross the border, you remember, into Ukraine. Well, two of her compatriots, of course, did cross. She, on the other hand, tore her passport and couldn't cross. She did it in this great act of defiance. For a while, people thought she had been disappeared. It was ridiculous. And anyhow, she's actually in Belarus. She's not in Lithuania. I forget this woman's name, but she's the one with the dyed blonde hair that's very short. Strong lesbian vibe, but different than Tikhanovskaya's lesbian vibe. Um, anyhow, those two compatriots of hers are now in Russia, and they are in talks with Putin. Because one of the things I think that's sort of becoming clear right now is Russia and this is the seminal event, by the way, but I'm sure it's been going on underneath the surface for a long time. I think Russia has been basically like opping these protests. They're steering them in certain directions that they're going to become more unpopular. Make no mistake, Putin wants Lukashenko out. Lukashenko is a liability. What they need is someone who, frankly, even the Russians can like, because the Russians actually don't like Lukashenko.
It's funny because they
The vast
used to like it. Actually, when the Union State Treaty was voted on in Belarus, like there were like hardcore Russian nationalists saying Lukashenko should be the head of the new Union State. Like that's how much he's fallen out of favor. Just to put it in perspective. But yeah, Russia they do want these protests to crash and burn. But again, they dislike Lukashenko because they I would say they view Lukashenko as too much liability, too willing to cooperate with the West. We saw what happened at the beginning of this year, buying the American oil and gas, talking to the European Union to the point where it's like, yeah, of course they want somebody else. It's just that they don't want a corporate lesbian
Yeah,
in charge. They take Lukashenko over the corporate lesbian. Point being,
right, and he squandered all his political cachet because he didn't have, like, he has a lot of years. Basically, it's a small country. He has a lot of years to basically scope out what's happening in the world and how to adapt his reelection policy and strategy, right? Um, in a way that is adaptive but not compromising with times, right? Instead, what he does is he doesn't really change, especially the outward appearance. Instead, what he does is he decides to do an Erdogan. So, he opens up an American embassy in Minsk for the first time. He, like you say, he made the gas deal. So he thinks he's going to like pivot. He's going to pretend to pivot to the West in order to extract from Russia everything that he wants, right? And frankly, like, it blew up in his face because he simply doesn't have that kind of clout, and he doesn't have a country that's as geopolitically strategically important as, say, a country like Turkey. It's not that Belarus doesn't have geopolitical importance; it
yeah,
does.
but compared to the
But
Bosphorus and being on Russia's, I mean, it is on Russia's doorstep. Being on Russia's doorstep in the way that it is positioned right south into the Caucasus, and again, I think the big point comes down again to the Bosphorus is really that gateway into the Black Sea. Belarus is important, like I said. It is that chunk. You'd be right on Russia's doorstep if you had it in your column, but I think having that opening to the Black Sea is much more important if you're looking to take down Russia. Hence the big focus on Crimea for all these years because that's Russia's door to the Black Sea.
right, right. So I'm actually not afraid of Belarus being taken away. I think they kind of know it's failed now. Another big moment was basically when Lukashenko decided to shut down all foreign media. That was a big move. The other is, frankly, how many irregular weekends can you have? Like, okay, they're irregular weekends. You're doing the protesting. This has been going on for 2 months now. There's still no violence. There was violence the first 2 nights. And now there's just some violence where people are being dragged. There's a little bit of scuffling, but nothing like we saw the first 2 nights. To date, only one person has died. So it's not exactly like what's happening in the States, not by a long shot. So I would say, you know, like, either mount a stronger opposition or you can forget about it because people will lose interest.
Yeah, like I've said in previous episodes, the fact that they now I know there was a lot less to work with, but the fact that they didn't take the approach they did in Ukraine, talked about nationalism and breaking away from the Russian yoke, and that you're the true heirs to the ancient Rus. Of course, they didn't do that there, but again, that played much more effectively than girl boss corporate lesbians going to take over from the patriarchal dictator. That's because that's the narrative they went with this time, and I mean, look how much it flopped. They went to the liberalism immediately, which may show maybe it was a different approach based on what they were given, or maybe that the people behind these, the NGOs, the State Department, whatever other intelligence agencies, have just become so impotent that this is their go-to. They've bought into their own narrative so much that they think, you know what? If we just have a strong, empowered woman out there, there's nothing we can't do.
Yeah, and like let's not forget, Tikhanovskaya is now claiming that the votes were stolen, but over a month ago, Lukashenko offered to have another election by November. She declined. Lukashenko invited observers from the EU to see if the voting was fair. They declined. So what's going on here? Why are they refusing to monitor these situations? Of course, the other question you could ask is, if we consider his reelection, 80%, it's always 80%. It is ridiculous. I mean, I don't believe the 80%,
Look,
but in
I
a
don't
way, I
believe the
would argue,
election results are legitimate, but here's the thing: I don't care.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't either. But for the sake of argument, it is quite odd that these European democracy advisors and observers would forego the opportunity to like literally prove that he's rigging the election. Like, why not do it? Why not claim it right away? Why not substantiate it? Maybe you can argue they don't have to. All they have to do, like, because everybody already understands, like Belarus, bad Belarus, Russian puppet state, so on and so forth. But it nonetheless is interesting to me that like they denied that and then she outright lied that like he wasn't willing to have a reelection. It was her that turned it down. So
I mean, it sounds like your typical woman out. It was you who did, and it's like, like, yep. This is the future. I suppose that people should be thankful when they have such incompetent enemies. That's my optimistic point of view to offset some of your pessimism. But I just realized we are 50 minutes into this and we just now covered Belarus. So you know what? We're gonna breeze through these last ones. Try to still get in that nice clean hour and a half we usually do. And moving on to that,
yeah,
the EU is seeking new sanctions against Russia for the poisoning of one Alexei Navalny. So sad that the poison
yeah.
wasn't as effective as it usually is. I mean, the fearsome Russian intelligence agencies. I
It
guess they,
wasn't even Novichok.
yeah, they just can't do it like they used to. I mean, Litvenko, he was taken out. I guess Skripal and his daughter, they were spared that same fate from the incompetent Russian intelligence agents. That was actually a very early topic on this show, which yeah, that brings back some memories. With the I don't know, the UK in early 2018 was something else. Like, not that it isn't crazy now, but just then that was something else. But of course, the primary drivers behind this are Germany, which again coincides with the debacle behind the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. France also playing
Mm-hmm.
along with this game. No surprise, Macron still has to keep those liberal credentials. I mean, at the end of the day, we do have to acknowledge, as base as he may be sometimes, he's still a liberal. And just the main players you'd expect from the European Union, the people in Brussels. Um, I haven't heard much pushback from the usual suspects, such as some of the southern European countries and Eastern European countries that would typically oppose sanctions on Russia. You would think Italy, Hungary, etc. But I haven't heard anything from them vocally supporting it either. So I imagine that just for the sake of self-preservation in their own economies, they're opposed to sanctions. But again, they haven't vocally voiced this, and honestly, I don't know how much more or how many more people they can really sanction at this point without going for an outright embargo. It seems like I mean, how many waves of sanctions have they passed since Crimea? It's been a ridiculous amount. You figure at that point it would be a full embargo, travel restrictions, everything. But no, cooperation with Russia continues, partnerships with Russia continues. All I'm gonna say is, and of course I think this would be a very bad move that would escalate things a lot. If they were really so concerned about the terror of Russia and what it was getting to, they would put energy sanctions on Russia. Now, again, I know the U.S. is trying to stifle Nord Stream 2, but it's not like the U.S. is trying to block all energy trade from Russia to Europe. But like I said, if they really wanted to hit Russia where it hurts, they really perceived Russia as this massive threat that they claimed to do, they would go after the energy sector. And honestly, I think at this point, it's all just on paper. It's all just for show. To the point where these European countries, they want to play along. They want to wave their finger at big bad Russia. But again, it's too economically inconvenient for them to actually go all the way with it.
Yes, I mean those are all solid points. I don't see Germany right now cracking. All the talk about canceling Nord Stream 2 seem to have fallen by the wayside. Um, of course, it shouldn't be forgotten that there's a lot of insurance on this deal, and if it is dumped, it will be Germany that will have to foot the bill, and not Russia. And we're talking many, many billion. So, and furthermore, Russia is now cooperating even more with China for oil and gas. That was in the news last week, which is exactly what we would
Pretty sure they
be
also just
expecting.
struck some deals from India recently, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yes. So, you know, uh, like I say, the, it will impact Europe more. And frankly, Poland is being ridiculous, and so is Ukraine. And this, like, we have to break up this two deal. Russia's going to become too strong. It's like Russia is going to become stronger regardless, right? It's going to have more deals with China. Ultimately, that's where its destiny lies.
I mean,
Um,
that's the whole world, isn't it? The focus is on Asia. It's on East Asia, and again, not only China, but it's got pretty good inroads with both North and South Korea. The relations with Japan are better than I would have expected. Southeast Asia, I'm pretty sure Vietnam actually has some deals with them right now. Philippines is all over the place. So, but again, like the future is in East Asia and to an extent Central Asia, and it looks like despite Russia's heavy involvement in Europe, a lot of places they're playing their cards are with countries like China and other East Asian countries.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, so those years, I would say like 2013, 2014, that's really when like Russia was never going to come back to the West. That was it. It was over. And we've discussed it before. Russia cannot be integrated into the EU. It's literally too strong. And it doesn't mean like, how can I put it? I know its GDP is like no greater than Italy's, but the kind of energy dependency that the EU would have on Russia and the sovereign Russia, within the EU would it would become too influential. Like, if you don't believe me, say for let's bring up visas, right? So Russia has liberalized visas for Westerners and other people, but also particularly for Westerners to come and visit Russia, right? So what often what happens is you have the Western whiners basically say that if we can only get the youth in Europe, they would see how great Europe is, and they would like overcome Russian propaganda. It's like, well, Russia like four times, sometimes for an extended period of time, and I can tell you they consume quite a bit of Western media. And number two, it's actually the West that is not giving them easy access into Europe. So that really makes you think
Yeah, and
about
to actually go on
who's
that
really
point,
scared here.
our good friend Vile Varangian, he said, I don't remember what it was on the show or on his Twitter, that I think it was his old Twitter account, so it's gone by now, that the liberal Russians who go abroad and come back and start spouting liberal talking points mainly go to places like Poland and the Czech Republic, the I suppose quote unquote like more developed Slavic countries, the Slavic countries with the quote unquote higher standards of living, whatever. And the ones who go abroad and large Russian diaspora population in Germany, and again lesser degree France, but the ones who go to like to the traditional Western countries, usually come back unaffected or even more on the hardliner side rather than the liberal side.
Yeah.
So that's something to also consider. That it's mainly the ones traveling to the near abroad, to again like places like Poland and I suppose a few years ago Ukraine, the Baltic states, etc., where they come back as more liberal, which I think is, I mean, it makes sense when you
Mhm.
actually think about it, but just on the surface, it sounds very odd.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, it is kind of counterintuitive, which kind of lets you know just how strong the propaganda is here. So yeah, I mean that's all I have to say about about Russia and the current situation with I mean they're going to have to like literally create even more sanctions. The sanctions are already there, and like if we can move on to the next subject to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, like people have been asking why hasn't Russia intervened more decisively uh, on the part of Armenia. Well, I mean, Turkey, for instance, can bring jihadists into that region. Like, there's many of them. Like, if you follow some Telegram accounts, you can see that these guys have been killed. Um, in Syria, 15 have been arrested as of yesterday or today, who refused to go and fight. Several dozens have already been killed. So, how is Erdogan able to transport uh, some of these people are terrorists, but I mean, they're basically fanatics. So how is he able to bring these jihadists from that area into Cabernet and like no one bats an eye, right? If Russia intervened more thoroughly, right, there would be greater reprimands.
Look at just the Russian volunteers going to the Donbass and how much outrage that caused. Another point to make about that: when you get volunteers who aren't necessarily affiliated with their nation's military or mercenaries, that usually comes from a surplus of young men who don't necessarily have anything tying them down in life, such as a family or anything like that. Which is why, again, they're so abundant in the Middle East. Why there's so many jihadists, which again, a lot of them just boil down to being mercenaries in Syria, in Libya, etc. Russia actually has the exact opposite problem, where they have a surplus of older women. That's the way the Russian population demographics are right now. So it's not exactly like there's a lot of young men with no prospects looking to go abroad to fight, because a lot. I mean, again, just with the gender imbalance still that's left over from the 90s, it is relatively easier for a Russian man to again become more settled down in life in terms of seeking a woman, seeking a job. So again, just to compare those dynamics. So number one, they don't have that to spare. They don't have to don't go entice their young men who, like I said, are already more of a scarce resource than other countries to go fight abroad.
Yeah.
And number two, the backlash to the point where, like I said, when they did that in the Donbass, even without the prompting of the government, it it was a Russian invasion according to the media.
Right, according to the media. Also, of course, Russia has a very big Armenian diaspora in Russia. Uh, However, for many Russians, they actually have relatives in eastern Ukraine. So, you know, or there's a familial aspect to it because eastern Ukraine has been traditionally Russian anyways, or they have a kind of a super political or super historical idea, like a meta position that Ukraine is a Slavic brother. They're just fooled right now, and the West is going to, drag them into global homo.
Yeah, it's
I
also
have to
the
go there. And
from a civilization narrative, the birthplace of Russia, where
yes,
the baptisms took
yeah,
place, and especially like Crimea, Kiev, like those areas right there, especially
absolutely,
not so much Western
absolutely.
Ukraine, but yeah, it plays into the idea that this is where we started and this is our core homeland, and the fact that it's separated from us is just wrong.
Right, and yeah, of course, you do have young men who, they're seeking adventure. They might have no other opportunities. Um, that's valid as well. But the truth is really that Armenia doesn't like from their standpoint. Armenia doesn't mean the same thing to them. I mean, you wouldn't expect it to. To be honest, like for the average young Russian guy that wants to get in a fight and he wants to like maybe kill a few NATO soldiers, like the truth is like Serbia is far more important for him to risk it all there than Armenia.
Yeah, and
So, but yeah, so there would be consequences for Russia even more so. And of course, Russia has deals with both of these countries. And I would say also what Azerbaijan wants, really, it cannot get. Like, most people have basically said that Azerbaijan started this. I don't know. You could say, well, the war hasn't been over since 2018. And others could argue, well, there was a peace deal, but the war really hasn't been over since 1994. But the fact of the matter is, like 90%, and of course, there was a greater amount of Azerbaijanis that lived there that were still a minority. And I think it was like a 70-30, or maybe like a 32-68 split, something like that. But at the moment, it's like 90 to 10. So how are you going to make that entire region yours? Seems very unlikely, right? And then you have the prospect of Erdogan, right? Now, this is a field where Erdogan can get away with all kinds of shit. They do. The U.S. will simply allow it. The place where he can't is what he's doing right now with that vessel, basically that ship. What's the? I can't even think of the term. Basically, it's an analysis, like a geographical analysis of the seafloor. It's there to search. Now they retired
surveyorship.
this a surveyor ship, so they retired momentarily. Docked the surveyor ship, uh, part of a sort of peace deal, if you will. Uh, but now he's scouting the Eastern Mediterranean again with it. The EU is upset. France is upset. Even the US is upset with him. That's an area, of course, where they will put the pressure on Erdogan, right? But if it's Idlib, if it's Syria, if it's the Southern Caucasus, no one will bat an eye.
Yeah,
So he
absolutely.
knows
It's
he can play there. He knows he can get away with it.
yeah, and again, especially the Western powers who, again, they don't have any. I would say again they obviously lean more towards Azerbaijan, but they don't have really as much a stake in this insofar as it goes outside of starting a fire on Russia's doorstep. That's really their only concern. They don't care how it gets done so long as it gets done, so they'll tolerate this from Turkey. Now, the other interesting news out of this is, of course,
Yes, exactly.
Israel has said it's going to discontinue giving the Azeris drones, which still hasn't happened. And allegedly, Iranian air defenses shot down an Azeri drone that was provided them by Israel. The fighting again has been the same skirmish it has been. There was a very, very brief ceasefire that fell apart faster than any of the Libyan or Syrian ceasefires to show what we're dealing with here. And again, the Azeris have taken to mass shelling campaigns, which is very familiar if you look at what Turkey does in Syria. These are a lot of the same fighters they brought over. And again, it's been more or less a stalemate. Honestly, when I first heard about the ceasefire, I thought, oh, my prediction's coming true. This is really just gonna. They're gonna kick the can down the road a little bit, but it looks like peace will prevail for now. It was less than 24 hours before this thing was broken. So, I mean, I was right
Yeah.
and I was wrong, but mostly I was wrong when it came to the ceasefire. And again, I do think it's interesting that the fact that again it goes back as far as the West is concerned. So long as there's chaos on Russia's border, they don't care how it gets done. They don't care who's doing it. Good by them. It could be Armenia harassing Russian troops or Russian interests in the Caucasus, and they wouldn't care. they would actually prefer it if both of them were hostile to Russia, which again, there's been a lot of color revolution push in Armenia, and of course, Israel giving the drones to Azerbaijan. There's no consequences for them doing that. They're not even enraging any of the other Arabs or Muslims because, I mean, I know Azerbaijan's more secular, but they're giving them to a country that's at least Muslim on paper. Which, again, if you want, just to make a broader point, if you want something else to show to people who consider themselves pro-Israel or Christian Zionists, here's another case of them directly. This is how they repay you. Let's just put it that way. But again, that's
Yeah,
beside the
yeah.
point. I just think it stands in. They're willing to side with a bunch of atheists and Muslims over the what is ostensibly one of the oldest Christian nations in the world. And again, that's no surprise. In terms of the actual conflict, though, like I said, not much has changed since it started. It's been pretty much stalemate, and it's been a lot of skirmish fighting, which is typical of what you'd expect from fourth generation warfare, especially with the kind of people Turkey are shipping over. They're used to the sort of combat from Syria and Libya, so the the combat we're actually seeing going on right now, again, like I said, not much of a surprise.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was to be honest, that I wasn't expecting the treaty to the ceasefire to last too long. Um, this is a very contested region, and my feeling is that Azerbaijan will not rest until it gets like some kind of extraordinary deal. Um, I think they understand that like they can't just move out all these Armenians who are living there and say, "Well, this is Azerbaijan clay now." That's unrealistic. That's not going to happen, and they're not really going to. They're not going to get support from the West. Turkey will probably not be enough, and Turkey's also reaching this limit where it's stretching itself. So um, Turkey can provide the help, but it risks losing its position in Libya and Syria as well.
Yeah, Turkey again.
So
They've been ascendant. They have really, I would say, gone above and beyond what I thought they were capable of. But they are starting to hit their limitations. Two conflicts they can manage. I think a third is we're really starting to see them stretch themselves thin to the point where I don't think there's any sort of fourth theater they'd be able to get involved in for right now until one of these other ones closes or they decide to sacrifice one of these. But with the direction things are going in Syria, they might have a free hand with that soon. And without further ado, I suppose we should get into that.
yes,
So, here is Syria. Now, starting news, which I think is not anything surprising, but anything that we haven't heard about in a while. The IDF released information that last week they partook in military operations against the Syrian military on the border of the Golan Heights. No surprise, really. That's to be expected. There is a Swedish surveillance plane monitoring the eastern Mediterranean, and I guess it was Sweden's turn this week. Russian patrols are helicopter patrols are over eastern Syria, and apparently we're dispersing crowds of Kurdish activists, Kurdish demonstrators, by the American oil fields, no less. So, Turkey continues its shelling campaign in northern Syria, all across against Kurdish and FCF positions, and the push toward Idlib continues to the point where it shrinks little by little. It looks like uh, some of the groups within Syria are no longer loyal to Turkey, so there's been a little bit of conflict there. But again, most of Turkey's operations have been shelling operations against Kurdish and other SDF forces. But it looks like while the entire world is distracted with everything else, the Syrians and their allies have taken this opportunity to again push into Idlib. Relatively little cost on their end, at least what they're openly telling us, because again, casualties with these kind of things are always higher than what the public numbers lead you to believe, whether that be because of suppression of information or just genuine miscounting. Because I mean, again, it is a war. It's hard to keep track of every number that is out there in a situation like this, but it looks like that
oh
thought
yeah, this estimate.
Yeah, it looks like that pocket in Idlib is coming to a close, and like I said, this goes back to my theory that the results of the presidential election are uncertain, so they want to close this front before a potentially more hostile United States president comes into office in the form of Biden. Because I don't think Biden would be full on for intervention in Syria, but he would put pressures back on that. He would continue funding the quote unquote moderate rebels and freedom fighters and forces for democracy. Now, I think most of that would be focused in eastern Syria with the Kurds under a Biden administration. But again, you know that some of it, a significant amount, would still go to these jihadist groups in northeastern Syria. And that, the U.S. and Turkey, despite Biden's rhetoric about the Kurds and about how Turkey must be brought back in the line, must learn to be a team player, blah, 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 I think they would find a lot of common ground on what's left of Idlib. So that I know I'm repeating myself from last week, but that right here is what you're saying. This final push towards Idlib that has been again very successful for the Syrian forces and of course their allies in Russia, Iran, and the various other groups that support them. And honestly, like I said in previous weeks, I think we're closer to the end of the front in Idlib than we've ever been.
Yes, and Erdogan is risking his reputation to some extent. I think the clue for if you're a Turkmen living in that area, and of course it does have kind of like, I suppose, a semi-indigenous Turkmen population there. It's been there for a long time. This isn't to say the Turkmen from actual Turkmenistan, Uyghurs from China, and Chechens haven't moved into that area. They most certainly have. But it also has Arabs and other Muslims from other regions. But I think when he decided to do the patrols with the Russians and to create that no conflict zone around Idlib, I think many of those groups understood that maybe their time for expansion is over. Well, I think their time for expansion is definitely over now. I think they see it. And I think, he's risking a lot here. I understand his rationale, right? Like, what's Idlib to him except a kind of, brotherly support for other Turkmen? Not a huge population there, but a lot of those groups depended on that narrative
Yeah, and it's enough just to
to
be
receive.
that wedge, just enough to keep a little bit of distance between Turkey and Syria proper.
Right. But his real concern is the Kurdish held areas. That's really his task, is to subdue those regions, to find a way to get rid of those Kurds in that area. Right. And what I suspect is, he may have to make a deal with Assad, and it might involve pissing off the U.S. But it's still too early to tell because Assad doesn't have really that much power over his own country right now. It doesn't mean he can't make deals. He will. And I think that Erdogan's move to um, deport some of these fighters in Idlib over to Nagorno-Karabakh is maybe it's a move of desperation because I don't know, where is this war going to go? Um, how much more hot is it going? Uh, he's going to need a lot more fighters, and it is coming. Like if he wants these three theaters going, he's going to need to eventually actually start using his own troops. Now I know he's got artillery and he's got tanks and everything, but I mean he needs more foot soldiers. He can't just hide behind um, the jihadists that he's supporting while he's firing from behind with artillery. He's going to have to commit more of that. And if he does, and the casualties start to mount, his popularity is going to go down. It really is a kind of a Hail Mary pass that he's doing here. Now he has, I have to say, wildly successful despite it all. But I can't help but think that we're looking at some kind of a compromise that he's going to have to make, unless, as you say, the election might change everything. And if Biden wins, I can imagine a U.S. presidency that is The deal that they're going to make basically is this. Uh, don't worry about the pipelines in the Mediterranean. We'll include you one way or another. But we need you to be a thorn in Russia's side. If you can convince Erdogan to adopt that position, I guess fine. But the truth is, there's already too many deals already established between Russia and Turkey. A lot has happened in these 4 years, a tremendous amount. And we should say these 5 years because it's been 5 years since Russia got involved in Syria.
Oh yeah. But yeah, the seeds that were planted at the end of the Obama administration, from an American perspective, have very much bloomed during the Trump administration in terms of Syria. And like I said, despite Biden's rhetoric saying we must rein Turkey in, again, reining Turkey in is getting them to exert America's will onto neighboring countries such as Syria or almost neighboring countries such as Russia. It's getting Turkey back in line to the point where they're willing to play ball less with Russia and more with the U.S. to the point where Turkey returns to its historical norm. That's really all they want at this point. The Kurds are going to be a wedge on that side. The U.S. is going to talk about them whenever they're dissatisfied with Turkey as a proxy of saying, get in line, Erdogan. And yeah, I think that would be the direction under a Biden administration. Under a Trump administration, I think that Syria is now in the rearview mirror, as it were, to the point where they'll say something about it every once in a while. They'll talk about withdrawing of troops here and there, but at the end of the day, I think at least from what a Trump administration would give us, Syria is sort of on the back burner at this point, even compared to other international affairs. And international affairs are definitely on the back burner for Trump with everything else going on, especially in an election year. So, I suppose that wraps it up for Syria.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add other than what I said.
Just a brief look at Libya before we get out of here. Things have pretty much stabilized. The Turks have been moving in more and more fighters. They supplies from Egypt have continued to come in, and Egyptian support for Libya has continued to come in. The peace talks that were scheduled for a few weeks ago, I don't think anything really substantial came of it. It was a meeting between Russia, Turkey, Germany, and France, I believe. And again, much like the meetings they used to have on Syria in 2017, 2018, pretty much just for show. And it seems like Libya has also stagnated because you had Turkey come in, they stabilized the GNA government, and they've kept forces there, they kept these jihadists there, but it seems like the breakout in Armenia and Azerbaijan has really become the main focus of has really become their main focus, and I suppose it's because Libya has calmed down enough to the point where Turkey has more or less secured their interest there. They can live with the sort of stalemate that has been created. There hasn't been much active fighting on the front, at least now behind the front lines with the LNA remnants left behind GNA lines. There's been some fighting. There's been the usual operations, but at the end of the day, it looks like Turkey has more or less accomplished their goals in Libya. Now, I wouldn't say they've secured them yet to the point where if they left it, things would be stable and things would go their way. I still think they have to keep that presence of jihadists or whatever limited forces they have in the country to maintain the status quo. But ultimately, I think the status quo is pretty good for them right now, which is why they aren't pushing any further, which is why Egypt has calmed down because Turkey isn't pushing any further. But we haven't talked about Libya in a few weeks, and I felt like that despite not much going on, we still should just
Yeah,
show the reason why and how it's pretty much just stagnated.
it has actually stagnated quite a bit, and if it hadn't, Erdogan would not have involved himself in the Nagorno Karabakh as much as he has. So it's given him breathing room, but it also presents an opportune time for Egypt too, to maybe mount something. It depends how well invested people are on the ground, right? Because it certainly can provide the air cover, right? And um, France might be willing to do something, although it would have to be quite covert. It couldn't be. I don't even know if it could be sanctions, but let's say it would provide uh, military intelligence real time with basically planes that that can give them real time information where enemy combatants are, both on the ground and in the air. Uh, but other than that, right now, yeah, it's the as far as I know, the oil fields have not been opened up. It is going to go hot again because it's not. This isn't this isn't a situation that can stay peaceful for very long. Either you're going to have an even greater exodus of people leaving, or you're going to have people who are going to be committed to resolve this thing one way or another to at least have some kind of an economy.
Yeah, and again, there's a vested interest, even though it comes from opposite perspectives, where France and Western Europe, I mean, they've gotten Italy, they've gotten a few other Western European countries to go along with their side, as well as even Russia to a degree, as we've discussed before. And Turkey and the
Yeah.
side that's partnering with them, they're both vested in stability in Libya, just that they both support two different factions. And because of that, um, being so invested in stability, they want to keep the factions away from each other's throats while keeping the upper hand for their faction. So it's the recipe for a stalemate.
Yeah, yeah. You would hope just for the well-being of the average person in Libya that something can be resolved and basically and people can share the economy, right? The benefits and stops the sort of basically the tribalistic um, discontent with the current situation. Saudi Arabia is imposing even more sanctions, curiously enough, on Turkey last week. So they're invested in being a real anti-Turkey state, and I would wager it has more to do than just Armenia. This is also Libya as well.
Yeah, and watching it's not that Turkey and Saudi Arabia were ever on good terms, but watching it all unfurl is very interesting. And honestly, in terms of Libya, I know it's a bit of a long way off, but I mean, at this point, it looks like the borders are developing for a sort of partition, as if you were. Maybe not officially, but at the point where it's two parallel governments within the same state, which isn't unheard of for a country like Libya. But like I said, for all we know, a year from now we could be talking about this in 2021 that we have Libya, which would be the LNA controlled territory, and the GNA becomes Tripolitania or whatever. But
Yeah,
I suppose that's all I had for Libya. I figured I'd just do a brief update to round out the show.
yeah. I don't have anything to add either.
Well, a lot of ground covered, especially a lot of election ground covered. And just for a fair warning, like I said, we're 3 weeks out from the election, so we have two shows we can do before the election, and maybe a special episode here and there. We'll see how the schedules work out. But yeah, expect the first half of the show for the next couple weeks here to be dedicated to election talk and election predictions. Just as a final reminder, right here in the bottom right was GSP's prediction as of October 13th, 2020. This is my prediction as of October 13th, 2020. Again, not really anything really scientific or really in depth in terms of poll analysis. Just the basic polls and gut instinct. And these are the two maps we came up with. So we'll let you know what we think next week or next time we do a show because, like I said, I imagine with all the election news and the at least one more debate coming up, we'll have a lot more to say on the presidential election. But for now, I think that does it.
Yeah, that's it for me too.
So see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye.